and to IO Extended UK and Ireland.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Google Developer Groups to Google I/O Extended 2021 UK and Ireland. It's a big pleasure have everyone here. It's a big pleasure to be here. Quite excited to our track today, Cassie. Okay, let's watch a quick video.
Technology brings us closer together, even when we're far apart. Google Developer Groups host meetup events for local technologists to connect, learn, and grow with others in their area.
The project I'm mostly proud of would be teaching introduction to programming to 7 girls in my hometown.
In the GDJ, I used to attend various workshops, like it was on Firebase, Android, Cloud. Everyone is learning from someone else.
We started to meet twice a week for a long time, learning Google Cloud. Amazing experience.
After joining Accenture as a software engineer, I started to share my journey in Medium, podcasts, and talks at online bootcamps.
My talk inspired one of community members a lot. So I mentored him to start his latter path. And 1 year later, at the same conference, he was giving a talk at the same stage.
One member of our community moved from being a DJ at our event to a developer and the first leading bank in the country.
When we do events that impact a lot of people, we are bringing opportunity to our region. So a lot of investors, a lot of startups, they will start to see opportunities here.
All right. Here
Technology.
we go. It's a nice video, but just once. Okay. Welcome everyone again. Welcome to Google I/O Extended 2021. Just a quick disclaimer here. Google Developer Groups are a local or in-person meetups for developers to connect. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you, guys. This global community prides itself for being an inclusive environment. Everyone and anyone interested in tech, from beginner developers to experienced professionals, are very welcome to join. Google Developer Groups is a developer community program supported by Google and Google developers.
All right.
And here we are on Google I/O Extended UK and Ireland. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so we've covered what Google Developer Groups are. So what is IO Extended UK and Ireland? IO Extended events are organized by Google Developer Groups all over the world as a sort of follow-up after Google's main IO event, a big developer conference, which happens annually. And for this current event, there are 17 Google Developer Groups and 1 Developer Student Club and 1 SRE group all across the UK and Ireland that are working together on organizing various events that you can find on this channel. So all sorts of speakers on exciting topics in tech. Over the past 3 days, there have been 9 tracks on these topics. So today there are 3 tracks, and there has been 3 tracks every day for the past few days. And you can switch tracks by checking out the other videos in our channel, and you can also go back and watch old videos and previous tracks in the same place. some general housekeeping notes. So I'm Casey Nur. I'm from GDG Oxford, and I'm one of your hosts.
Hello, I'm Leo from GDG Dublin.
Right. And there is a code of conduct that is at the URL on this slide. It essentially boils down to be nice to each other, which I think we can all do. And we have an agenda for today, which Leo will go over.
Okay, right now we are going to have a lecture called 3 Developer Secrets for the Better UX. I'm quite excited to learn more about it. And 15 to 7, it is not your Graham's fault she can't use the internet. This promises to be a funny one. 7:15, how to be a dev ally for UX designers. 15 to 8, quick start kit to usability test. And 15 past 8, we are going to have a wrap up and Q&A. Quite a busy agenda today. Okay, please share on social media using our hashtag Google I/O Extended UKI, and please take a picture take a selfie, with the lecture that you are watching, and share. Let's spread the word.
All right. Our first speaker is Darren Hopton, and he's scheduled to speak in a few minutes, but I guess we'll bring him on quickly to just have a pre-chat before the talk. That's all right. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, bring us in early. That's fine. That's completely fine.
How are you doing?
I'm okay. Very excited about doing the talk. So yeah, and it looks like I'm wearing almost a matching shirt with my picture. So yeah, on brand.
I'm really excited to learn more about those secrets, Darren.
I know. As soon as I did this talk, and I've told a few people at work, I've been saying, oh, there are these 3 secrets that I've got, and everybody's, what are the secrets?
I have a suspicion that after you say it will not be a secret anymore.
Well, yeah, no, they're good secrets to let everyone know about. So yeah,
those things happen to secrets.
Yeah, you'll have to wait for the talk. That's what I've been saying to everyone.
So can you tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I suppose currently I'm a principal design consultant at Infinity Works. They've recently been acquired by Accenture. So I'm a principal design consultant for Accenture at the moment. That revolves around me going into different companies and just helping them to understand a bit of the value of design within organizations. Infinity Works is like really good on the developer side of things as well, and we look to kind of help with startup companies and got a real good track record of helping young companies to enable the latest kind of technology, and then marry that with amazing design. And when you have the latest technology and the latest kind of the unmet needs of the user, when those kind of things overlap, that's when you start to get some really good exciting projects that come out in loads of innovation. I've been doing design for a long time, pretty much my whole life as well. So I've been doing a lot of design.
What do you like about design in particular?
Oh wow, yeah, I love solving problems. Actually, I think that's probably one of the key things that trying to get across to people is that design is about solving problems, and that's where design and developers they both like solving those problems and how they work really well together. I think one of the things that's often overlooked by businesses is solving the right problems, and that's kind of one of the things that I like to go in and help businesses with, is trying to understand what are the right problems to solve.
Yeah. What do you find, I guess, do businesses, are they usually like very sort of amenable to design advice? Do they like things a particular way, or do they not see that it matters? Like how does that work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one thing that has happened, like particularly over the last few years, is that there used to be a real kind of feeling that design was about making things look pretty, and it's all about that kind of the kind of veneer around everything else. I think people have started to understand a little bit more that, you know, design is more about understanding what the actual user problems are, and then also when you marry those kind of user problems with the business problems and trying to get towards the right kind of outcomes, you'll be able to deliver a real difference, and that's where kind of design thinking can really help to improve the value of a business. And I've actually used it in quite a few different companies across the whole of the UK to be able to make some real successes and make a lot of companies a lot of money, but from some sometimes quite simple changes. Really, it's just changing the mindset of how to look at things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess sort of requirements gathering and figuring out what users actually need and what would make their kind of lives easier is a huge part of it.
Yeah, definitely. There's the kind of functional way of looking at things, and then there's what's meaningful to the user as well, and trying to attack things from the different kind of angles. So if you can really try to understand what's meaningful, it really does get to the core, and those are the kind of things that will actually help a product to be used more often. If it actually has a some kind of attached meaning to it, and actually solves a particular problem that they're having or an unmet need, definitely.
Right. I don't know. If you don't have any other questions, Leah, I can go ahead and let you get started.
Yeah, it's fine. I guess that it's okay. You start a bit early.
Cool. I can start a bit early and waffle on if you like. The last time I timed my talk, it was the first time I did it. It was like 15 minutes long. The second time I did it, it was like about 40 minutes long. So who knows?
Oh, I do see one question in the comments. Somebody
Okay.
has asked if there has been any business that you've had a standout impact on from your consulting.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I suppose from earlier on in my career, I suppose I went into work at Thomas Cook. They've declined since then, but at the time they were having some real kind of problems. I'd gone in there and actually helped them to have more of a human-centered approach to things, and went through all the different the different kind of processes for them, understanding things for the users. And this was for a company called netflights.com, which was part of Thomas Cook's Scheduled Businesses, and actually going through that whole process, testing with the users, and really getting to understand that. After we launched the product, I'd already got to know one of the data people, and he called me over, and there was a bit more tech that was done with it as well, but primarily from a lot of the differences in the actual user experience there were huge changes in the user experience. And when the data analysts kind of came over, and he showed me some figures on the screen and was saying that, telling me, oh yeah, showing me all these figures, and I was like, oh, that looks cool. What is it? And he was saying, oh, that's money coming in from the launch of the new website. And I was like, oh, that's good. That's nice to see. And he was like, no, that's a lot of money coming in. So, and that's since the launch of the thing. So, there was a huge impact from the launch of that thing. I think there was a 35% increase in overall sales, and something like a 1,500% increase in insurance sales and stuff like that. So some real kind of understanding of what the kind of key objectives of the business were really had a massive impact on the business there. And at that time they were able to predict that they would be able to last a little bit longer. So that was one thing that was a big impact.
And now I think we're actually on time. So
yeah, cool.
I
Okie
think
dokie.
that was a good time to start.
Nice one. So if I
Share your slides.
share the slides. Okie dokie. So specific thing. Go into presenter view.
All right, and I will let you go on.
Great stuff. Okie dokie. Yeah, hello and welcome to 3 Developer Secrets for Better UX. So basically, today just going to be talking about developers and designers working together, and they can be a bit of a dream team, but are they always? What problems might they have? And so basically, what I'm going to be talking through are some secrets to kind of help devs get better at UX. I was going to introduce myself a little bit. I've been a designer for 20 plus years. I'm married with 3 kids, and I like dogs. You may notice that I am actually using pictures of dogs instead of humans, but that's mainly because I do love dogs. Okay. I've worked in a lot of different companies and industries over the many years. I've even found myself winning some awards along the way. However, if you speak to my wife, she will tell you that I am not an award-winning gift giver here. This may seem like a bit of a tangent. I'll kind of link together later. One of the things I often struggle to think of what to buy her for a present, and I'm trying to think about what would be a really great gift. And earlier on in our kind of relationship, I kind of thought, oh yeah, well we need a new fridge. So I bought a fridge for her birthday, and I was thinking, yeah, that'd be a great present to get her. But apparently that was not a good thing to buy. I thought it was a good thing, but I hadn't actually considered what she might want. She didn't even want a fridge. It turns out that flowers would have been a perfect gift, and considerably cheaper. But I'd actually fallen into a trap, which kind of leads me nicely into secret number 1. Okay. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. I kind of touched on it a little bit before. So not so long ago, I was working in the travel industry, and there was lots of great work going on there. We were brought in to define some of the problems that they were having. We went through doing some wireframing. We created some workshops to try and define those particular problems. We'd ideate, sketch out the different ideas, and try to get to doing some user flows and all the usual kind of activities that you would do, trying to align all of the stakeholders. And then we eventually got to a stage where we created a prototype, and we were ready to go to user testing. So we used a nearby lab to do that user testing. And then what we did was we kind of went through a bit of the typical kind of process that you would have, where you would put the design together, you would test those with the users, you'd observe what the users were doing, and then you would analyze the results from that. And this is a process that you would do once you've done that. You'd analyze those results, you'd see where there are any kind of problems with the designs, and then you would iterate on those designs. And so in this particular situation, was kind of brought in early stages to look at this stuff, and we iterated on the designs. This is on a wireframing, prototyping, and then we tested again, and we went through, looked at the users, we'd fixed some of the problems, but some of the other problems emerged, and then we iterated those designs, and we did that again and again until we were kind of happy that we were heading in the right kind of direction from an experience point of view. We'd got a lot of the information hierarchy correct in a lot of the different areas, and the way that the company wanted to do things, they decided that once they got to that kind of stage, they decided to scale things up from there. So we brought in a couple of some extra designers and front-end developers, really kind of smart cookies, and brought them into the team. We started to recap on some of the designs and looking at some of the research that we'd done, and then kind of set them on the way of, okay, here's what we're doing. This is what we need to deliver. Go through it all and see what you could do from a design point of view. So they went on to work, and when I went to tackle on some of the other problems within the business, like trying to cross-sell and upsell certain things, and while I was doing that, they were busy creating like a bit of a design system, a design pattern libraries, and creating the front end and just pulling it all together and just doing an absolutely amazing job. Then a bit of time went by. They were like really super excited, and then they called me over to go through their work, where they'd got to, and so they started to present the work that they'd done, and I started to notice that there were some differences going on there, and they decided to improve on the designs. So they started to talk through what they'd done. Just quickly interrupt the story to say that I do know the dogs can't talk, just in case you were wondering. Anyway, so I asked the rationale behind the changes, and they were the right. They were thinking in the right kind of ways, but the designer came out with an absolute classic. Me, as the user, would prefer the design like this, which I asked them to kind of clarify a little bit more, and they said that they'd bought an airline ticket before online, so they were a user. And I've actually heard this quite a few times, where you think that because you actually use the product that you are a user, and in a lot of ways you are the user from that point of view. But in this particular kind of case, if you are designing something from that, you really need to be careful of something called the false consensus effect. Okay, so we actually believe that other people think the same as us, and the key thing is that you are not the user. I fell into this false consensus effect when I actually thought that we needed a fridge, so I thought it'd be a good present for my wife to get a fridge, but that I hadn't actually empathized enough with my wife in that particular situation, so I'd fallen into that trap. And really, we can't allow ourselves to fall into this trap. Okay, and this is taking us to the first secret. You are not the user. Okay, so it's really, really key not to fall into that. You just remember that you are not the user. Okay, in this particular situation, we discussed that the solution they'd come up with was actually a good one. We'd already thought about it earlier on in the actual iterations, but it actually tested quite badly. So there was something that wasn't quite right. So we actually went through and kind of went with the fourth iteration of the design rather than the first iteration of the design. The website was eventually kind of built. Several months later, it was launched, and there was a huge success and a massive gain in sales overall. So that was a really good situation and a good lesson to learn there. So you are not the user. Secret number one. Okay. And then just go on to secret number two. A couple of years ago, I was working in a fintech company. I was asked to go in there. They were in the process of acquiring a new company, and they needed to move some of those customers from the old platform to the new platform. They'd previously done a similar kind of thing, but it kind of performed poorly, and there were kind of tech issues there. But I think largely it was from a UX point of view, they hadn't really considered the users and thought it would be a real simple kind of process for them to do that. So I went through all the normal kind of design thinking process when I go in there, try and align with the different stakeholders to understand empathize with those users, so empathy mapping and user journeys from that type of thing, try and understand a bit more of what the business problems are and what business outcomes we want to achieve as well. So mapped everything out and just figured out new ways of simplifying the journeys with the dev team. We created some prototypes and we tested those with the users and set up some little mini labs and went through the same kind of design test, iterate, design, test, iterate, and learning from the mistakes. I'd made a lot of the same kind of mistakes that they'd done earlier on. My initial pass at what I thought was going to be a good thing. I'd kind of gone through all the typical kind of usability heuristics and all of this kind of standards that you would do to help in these kind of situations, but it was you still made the mistakes. And anyway, I pulled together these the stuff. I'd videoed some of the users, and I was in the process of pulling together a bit of a presentation on what was the best way forward and how it was how we could make a success of this acquisition. And I was in the process of pulling that together when I kind of heard a developer and a designer who were working on the mobile app, and they were talking about a design that they'd been doing, A bit of a nosy Parker, just kind of listening in a little bit. And there was the classic kind of situation where a dev had picked up a ticket before the designer had had a chance to have a look at it, and there's nothing wrong with this. And the developer had kind of picked it up and he started pulling together a design, and so they were just reviewing it together, the designer and the developer. In this particular kind of situation, the developer he'd kind of thought about the user and was going into the false consensus effect as well. Me as the user who's kind of thinking about this from that point of view, trying to think about the users, but it was kind of misplaced in this particular kind of situation. He'd actually created something that the designer thought was probably too complicated for the user, and the dev was reasonably insistent that it was actually quite simple interaction pattern, and that it would be that the users would be fine with it. So I kind of like leant over and I had the videos and I said, hey, do you want to actually have a look at the users? Just see a video of the users to see what they're like actually using the product. And it was, in which case they were both like really excited and said, yeah, that'd be amazing. We'd love to see that, so they were very excited about that. The dev, in his mind, I think he'd kind of assumed that, our user was, a young kind of person, man bun, beard, he drunk organic lattes and, rode a fixed geared bicycle, and it kind of fit a bit of what this developer would look like a bit himself anyway. Then I kind of spun up the video and started to play through the stuff. And I showed him a video of Dave, who was one of the typical kind of users. He kept his laptop in the drawer. It was there under lock and key. Once a week, he would get his laptop out. He'd open up his laptop and he would spend 2 hours sorting out his finances. He would then, once he'd finished doing that on a Saturday morning, he'd close his laptop down, he would put it back into his drawer and he would lock the thing and he wouldn't touch his computer for another week after that. And that was a typical kind of a user for this company at that stage, and what we kind of observed. And the dev was absolutely gobsmacked. He was pretty amazed. He just had no idea that it was, that it was like this old person. He was like really slowly going through all the interactions and he just taking a bit of time over doing this stuff. And so, even though I had to explain that, even though he was this guy was quite slow with stuff, he was actually a power user of the product. He was actually very good at using the product. But I also had to say, kind of remind the developer something as well that a lot of developers quite often forget about, and that's that, as a person who uses a computer all day, every day, most days, you're likely to be in the top 5% of capable computer users in the world. So as a designer, I use a computer most days, pretty much up, nearly all day, every day. So I'm probably in the top 5% of capable computers users in the world. But as a developer, you're likely to be in the top 1% of computer people in the world. And that's something they really need to kind of consider. A lot of the users, they don't use computers anywhere near as often as we do. Okay, so to actually think that we are similar to them is really easy. It's an easy trap to kind of fall into, and really you need to consider that you are the exception. You're pretty amazing compared to all those non-computer users. They may only use their computer once a week, and yeah, probably use their phone a lot more, but 99.9% of time they're using, different apps to our particular apps that we're working on or whatever. And essentially, everyone can run, but the equivalent of expecting a user to be able to use some of the, to be of a similar level to us or similar to us, is that is kind of expecting that, people can run, but you should be able to, expecting them to be able to beat this guy in a race or any of these people in there. They aren't anywhere near as capable or experienced as us. So that leads me on to secret number 2. You are amazing. Okay, don't forget that you are amazing. Okay, in this particular kind of situation, the project ended up being an amazing success, with a 85% completion rate from one of the platforms over to the other platform. And because we'd actually considered the users a lot, we actually got a commendation from the Bank of England on treating customers fairly, which was, is fairly unheard of at the time. But, if you put that effort in and really try to understand the users, you can make a real massive success of these things. Okay, so just a quick breather. On to secret number 3. So many years ago, I found myself working in the fashion industry, so setting up an e-commerce platform, designing the product detail pages, looking through the checkout funnel, working on the bit of the payment process, and all the usual kind of typical kind of things. We were really excited about the work that we'd done. Again, working with some other amazing designers and other kind of developers. We'd tried to understand what the user problems might have been. We brainstormed loads of different user journeys. We did some sketching out and ideation sessions to really try to get to a real ideal solution. We worked really hard, and then we got to a stage where we'd created what we thought was some amazing designs, and we put them together as a prototype, and we were looking to test these with users. So we set up a lab, brought in some users to kind of test those prototypes. We were confident that we'd nailed the designs. With that kind of particular kind of situation, if you're setting a lab, obviously we're coming out of lockdown again, so you're going to be able to speak to people face to face. So you need to set up a laptop or a phone or a computer with the prototype that's on there. You set up a camera to observe what the user's doing. It's really important to be able to see what they're doing, so that you can observe what they're doing, because what they actually say could be different to what they're actually doing. Trying to set up a camera to observe their face so that you can see what their emotional responses are, and and then also kind of sometimes you can go into a place where you have a two-way mirror so you can observe them, or you can use an online tool like usertesting.com that's been particularly good during the kind of COVID times when you've not been able to go face to face with people. And if you really want to do some rapid testing, they're a great company to work with. In this particular situation, we were doing some face-to-face stuff. We were really excited, and we observe these users doing this, using the prototype. We thought that we nailed it. Every single one of them, they were struggling to use our prototype. They were just getting completely stuck. They really didn't know what to do. They just couldn't see what to do. We were massively surprised. Hang on a minute. Actually, we're a bit more surprised than that. There we go. Actually, this face is already quite surprised, so we'll just leave it like that. But at the time, I remember like nearly, shouting, even though it's a two-way mirror and stuff. The button is literally right there. It's right in front of your eyes. Surely you can see that. And we're all getting really frustrated, and it just amazes you when you're actually observing the users. You may think that you've actually nailed it. But a lot of the times you can't, and in those kind of situations you can potentially get frustrated with the users, but you can't control what the users are thinking. You can't control if they don't understand your designs or their prototypes. It's really common for you to nail things the first time around. It's rare. It's very rare. Okay. And actually not being able to control those situations applies to many different things in your life, in events, and it's key to not get frustrated by those things out of your control. So you can't control if your train was cancelled. You can't control if it's raining. You can't control if the project's been canned. You can't control if a key stakeholder wants to make some changes to things. You can only control what you do next. And this is like part of a kind of Stoic philosophy that I really like. So you kind of try to seek to understand what is in your control and what isn't in your control. And when you do that, really you need to figure out how you respond to those events is in your control. That's actually what matters most. So this is secret number 3. So you can't control what other people do or say. You can only control how you respond. You can only control what you do next. Okay. So a quick recap before we move on. The 3 developer secrets for a better UX. You are not the user. Okay, don't fall into the trap of false consensus effect. Remember that you are amazing. You're in the top 1%. So don't beat yourself up if you do something and you want to try things out. Just try and consider that. Remember that you are amazing. And you can't control what happens with those kind of external events. They're out of your control. You can only control how you respond to those particular events. Okay, so those are the 3 secrets. Now I just wanted to spend a few minutes just going through a few different scenarios. Okay, so just taking those secrets into practice, those secrets, and try and put them into practice. Okay, so I'll talk you through a few different scenarios that you might find yourself in, and I want you to kind of consider those secrets and what you might be able to do. So just imagine that you're in the empathize phase of the design thinking process. This one here is the NNG's version of the design thinking process. There are a few others, I particularly like this one. And at this stage, essentially, you're looking to understand your users and the business problems, and then you'll explore some different ideas and solve those problems, and then you'll prototype and test any problems that you may have missed. You may even introduce some new ones from that point of view. But in this particular scenario, I want you to imagine you're in this empathize version, you're trying to understand the users, and you've been asked to attend an empathy mapping session, once again in the NNG version there. You're in there with a couple of UX designers, there may be some other developers and some other business stakeholders or subject matter experts across the business. And you might run through what the users might say. You think about what they're saying, what they're saying versus what they're doing, what they're thinking, and what they're feeling. And it's really important to try and think about what's the difference between what they might be saying, what they might be doing, because I mean, I, for example, say that I'm going to go for a run every single day, but I actually rarely do. And so with this particular kind of thing, it helps you to empathize with the users, but it mainly kind of helps to visualize people's thoughts on the users, and you just try and get into the head of those users and help you to understand a little bit more. So in this particular kind of situation, I want you to think about secret number 1. So you're not the user, but how would you use this information to help you in this kind of situation? Okay. So if you can just kind of put some of your thoughts, stick them in the comments section, or send me a tweet at Darren Hobden. Okay. Chuck a few of those things in there. Let me see if I can see a few. I may need to skip on here. I'm still just going to share that one. Okay. So you got something in from Sam. Come across all this all the time with stakeholders. They assume that they know who the users are. They may be domain experts, but trying to persuade them that they aren't the user is very difficult. So yeah, domain experts are and subject matter experts are actually super important to a business, but actually using this particular kind of false consensus effect is really useful for that kind of situation to explain that to them. Look, you're probably in the top 1% of people who know about selling cars, airplanes, getting those flights together, selling things online. You are an expert, but your customers aren't. So this is a situation where you can use that. Okay, so scenario 2, if you think about that you're amazing, just imagine that you're in the ideate phase of the design thinking process and you're exploring new options to help solve the problem. So you're in this kind of situation, and you've been asked to attend an ideation session itself. You're there again, so a couple of UX designers, some other developers, those other kind of SMEs and business stakeholders. You've already clearly defined what a particular problem is that you're trying to solve, and you need to sketch out some of those ideas. It may be you need to create as many ideas as you can, you do your crazy 8s. You might be sketching out some new interface ideas. And it might be they're using pens and stickies, and we might be getting back to doing that soon, or using tools like Miro or Mural, which were also quite common. So if you imagine that you're in that kind of scenario, and this is secret number 2, remember that you are amazing. How do you use this info to help you in a situation like this? So how can you use this secret to improve the outcomes? How can your knowledge help the user? How can you pare things back even to the most simplest of forms? Look at the designs, the ideas that you're doing. Are you asking too much of the user? Are you assuming too much? Okay, so yeah, just same again. Add some comments in the question add some thoughts in the comment section, or tweet me some of those things there. Just have a quick check. 25 minutes. Got another 5 minutes. Just got one more kind of scenario to go through. See, we've got a comment from Rob here. I always suspected I was amazing. Okay, nice one, Rob. It's great to know it's true. This is how we put things into perspective. Okay, yeah, thanks. So yeah, hopefully this will actually help to make things a lot easier. Just remember that you are amazing compared to a lot of the everyday people that may not use a computer very often at all. Okay, and then the final scenario. So you can only control what you do next. Just imagine that you're in the test phase of the design thinking process. You've prototyped and you have the results back. You've been asked to attend a user test kind of playback session. There are many different kind of stakeholders present. The tests aren't, but then the tests actually haven't come back how you expected. Your great idea, it turns out, has many different flaws. So how can you use this new secret to kind of help you to improve the outcomes in this type of situation? What events are out of your control? What can you do to manage how you respond to the situation? You might feel like your ego is being attacked or something like that, and do you get angry and say that they weren't real users anyway? How do you actually use this kind of you can only control what you do next? Those things are out of your control. You can actually say, oh yeah, well, we've learned from this type of situation, and we're using it to actually improve. And it's good that we've actually learned these things now rather than later. So yeah, just chuck some of your thoughts into the comment section, or send me a tweet. Let's have a quick look on Twitter. I got time. Okay. Yeah. So we've got something here from Nicola. She says, seeing the failures in a design is like gold. You can fix those problems and stop any future tech and design debt before it actually goes live. That's brilliant. Absolutely great. And it is really true. So, I mean, you can't control things that have happened in the past. Those things are out of your control, but, actually seeing these things and knowing that you can control what you do next is the really important thing, and learn from those failures. It's good to fail early and often with these types of things, and this is a way of doing that, learning from those things and actually driving it forward from there. And this is a process that's been incredibly useful. I've used it to great effect over my career for a long time. So just remember those 3 secrets. I'll just wrap things up. You are not the user. Don't fall into that trap. Don't buy your wife a fridge like I did. Really try and don't fall into that false consensus effect. Remember that you are amazing. You are in the top 1%. Think about those people who aren't. Don't beat yourself up if you do come up with something that is amazing, because you are amazing. And remember that last of all, you can't control what happens to you. Just try to understand those external events that are kind of out of your control, and you only control how you respond to those events. So these are your 3 secrets. You are not the user, you are amazing, and you can only control what you do next. Thank you very much for spending a few minutes of your time with me. Really appreciate your feedback. Connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event and enjoyed all the pictures of cute dogs. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Darren. I particularly liked this idea of not blaming the users, especially because I I don't know, I've definitely built things before where I'm like, oh, this is intuitive, this is easy to use, and people are like, no. I'm like, why? So I really like that. So
it's such an easy trap to kind of fall into, and I think it's like I said, it's blaming the users is probably the easiest thing you can do, and a lot of people do it. I have seen it in the past, and it's kind of, we want to learn from them, so trying to almost like get that disconnect, and these are some of those secrets to actually help you with that disconnect and help you to empathize with the designers as much as anything else, to see the type of things that they might be going through as well, and remember that as developers, you guys are amazing. You probably forget that, but the way that your brains work, the way that you solve these problems, and the different kind of the software that you use, you are amazing, and don't beat yourself up if you do actually come up with something that's difficult to understand for those users. Anyway, I'll stop waffling.
all right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Very nice talk.
All right, and Leo will introduce our next speaker.
Yeah, next one is my colleague, Martin. It's a big pleasure having you here, man. He's gonna answer a big question that I have in my life. Why my grams can't use the internet? And yeah, it will be nice learning it from you, man. Have the floor.
Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, is that working?
Yes, I can see
Perfect.
it. So I will leave and let you take control.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, thanks very much. So as Theo said, I'm his colleague. I'm a senior product designer at Toast. I've been working in design for about a decade, thereabouts. I've worked in a few different industries. My most recent one was insurance, and now I'm in the kind of restaurant space. So yeah, straight into it. What does the clickbaity title actually mean? So this talk is about accessibility in digital products. If any of you are familiar with architecture or product design, it's called universal design, and that's where it kind of originated. Maybe about 20, 30 years ago, actually 30, 40 years ago. So what does accessibility or universal design actually mean? So I've done my version of the definition. Designing and building things so that the maximum number of people can get the greatest use out of all of those things. That's the very short version. There are much longer versions that I have linked in the notes, but that is essentially it. And I know we all think that, of course, we want to do that all of the time, and we I suppose probably think we already do it. But there are a kind of a range of needs out there that we might not always think of, and that when we incorporate them into our products and services, we can make them so much better. So just talk a bit about some of those needs. So the first kind of category is visual. This is the one that's most obvious. People are most familiar with this one. Blindness or partial sightedness. There are many different kinds of partial sight. You can have partial sight, say like tunnel vision. You can have macular degeneration. You can have color blindness is also considered partial sight. About 8% of men, I think, suffer from color blindness. And there's cataracts and long-sightedness, which are associated with age, and there are a bunch of other eye conditions. Auditory, again, most people are familiar with this kind of full or partial deafness. The thing you mightn't be familiar with auditory is that kind of noisy environments, strong accents, things like that. Those are auditory needs that we can, that we need to address when designing products. Because we'll say if you're working in a bar, you can't rely on what people are saying to you. You normally have to rely on like reading their lips to understand their drink orders. You have motor problems that can result in any types of injuries. There's paralysis, temporary paralysis. Again, tremors are associated as people get older. Coordination issues. That's also associated with people get older and with certain conditions. Neurological issues, missing limbs, it kind of goes on and on. And then cognitive, again, you'll be aware of some of them like dyslexia and dyscalculia, but there are other things that affect your cognitive functioning. I think one of the biggest ones that affects cognitive functioning is just distraction. when you have many things to do, when there's a lot of stuff going on, your cognitive function deteriorates when you're trying to focus on tasks through all that noise. And that is something that we need to be cognizant of, because when we're testing software and when we're looking at our own software, it's just there on the table and it's the thing we're doing, it's the thing we're interested in. We're not the person who's trying to get through that form while also doing a bunch of other things. And that's a thing that we need to continue to think about. So there's a kind of a spectrum, what they call the persona spectrum. So it kind of takes into account those needs and then whether they're permanent, temporary, or situational. So permanent is obviously on the upper scale. So some of us have these needs all of the time. You can imagine being blind. That is you have an accessibility need all of the time. Temporary, anything from, a broken limb, to an ear infection. And then situational, I argue that it's kind of all of us most of the time, because there's never a perfect scenario for someone to be using your product. There's always something else going on in their life. They're driving, there's a text coming in, they have children to look after, they're thinking about something else, they're trying to walk down the street, they're watching TV at the same time as they're using your product. So there's always some distraction happening in the background. So just a little bit about what the data says. This is US data because that's the easiest stuff to Google, and I work for a US company. So it's a quarter of adults in the United States have some type of disability. That's 61 million people. 10.8% have cognition issues, 13.7 have mobility issues, and 4.6 are legally blind or have serious difficulty seeing. And these numbers are from 2018. That is increasing all the time because the largest section of the population with access, or the fastest growing section of the population is the over 60s, which have the greatest accessibility needs. So with all of this, you might think that maybe there would be a lot of websites out there that are kind of catering for it, or would be something that is kind of trending or up and coming. But you'd be wrong. So 98% of the world's top 1 million websites don't offer full accessibility. Many of them don't offer any type of accessibility, or just kind of accidental accessibility. And this is kind of, I suppose this is the problem statement in a way. But it's at this point usually that people are like, yeah, this is great and all, and it's nice to help needy people, and that's nice, but how am I going to make money off it? And why would I bother? And if 98% of the world's websites can get on just fine without it, I'm sure we'll be fine as well. But I'm kind of here to say that that's not the case. And there are kind of carrot and stick reasons to look at accessibility. And we'll start with the stick because it's it's the more fun. So the big stick is that it's going to cost you money. Americans with Disabilities Act has been around since 1990. It has recently been interpreted in many court cases as applying to websites as well. So it used to apply to things like business premises. But with more and more companies doing their business solely online, like for example, Domino's, the courts are interpreting this as that's your business premises, that's your shop front, that is the way that customers are accessing your products and services. So it needs to be accessible. And then the European Accessibility Act came in 2019, and so it's officially legally in force, and they will start to ramp up the enforcement of this as the years go by. So the takeaway there is that either regulators are going to come and get you, or people are going to sue you, and there are plenty of cases. The cases are increasing every year. There's a website that tracks them that I forgot to actually include, but I did include a link to the Domino's case for you to read after. And so that's all the negative reasons, or most of the negative reasons. There are also actually positive reasons to do this type of work, and those are even more fun. So the first one is this is supposed to be the thing that we all get out of bed to do in the morning, to make products that people will enjoy to use, that will be effective, that will be beautiful, that will make money for our company so we can eat, things like that. So that's the first one. The second one is the fact that so few are doing it. There's an opportunity there to be one of the first and get the credit. And it's not a very noble impulse, but I mean, branding opportunities makes the sell a little bit easier. The third one, of course, is that with this rapidly aging population means that addressable market is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And those people have a lot of cash because they've worked for their entire lives and have built up investments, and they have money to spend, and they will spend it in the place where it's easier to spend, that caters for their needs, rather than the place that won't. And then if you're a sap, you can get that warm fuzzy feeling, like providing opportunities to people that don't have the opportunities. I mean, I think that we all, to a certain degree, come into this job, work in technology, believing in the ability of technology to enable people to do things they couldn't do before. And I think that's a big motivator for a lot of people. And there's also the diversity and inclusion thing, if you've heard of it, maybe. It's the latest thing. So those aren't all the reasons. There's more. One of the coolest things is that if you improve accessibility for some people, those people at the upper end of the scale, you end up improving it for everybody. And I'll give you the example of ramps, escalators, and lifts. Those things, they improve life for everybody. They improve everybody's access to the physical built environment. When they cut off the curbs to allow wheelchairs to get up, it improves life for everybody. It's less of a trip hazard. So these things have this trickle down effect that you can capitalize on, that all of your users will benefit from. And the other coolest thing is that it provides standards, objective standards, to make design decisions. So when you follow accessibility standards, they are far less fluffy than these horrible conversations we've all been involved in about where the button should go and how big the text should be and whether it should be a light gray or a dark gray, and all these things that have made everyone crazy at some point. When you employ accessibility standards, you have something objective to mark your work against, and it means that everybody knows what to expect, and it means that you bring up the level of your product overall for everyone. So speaking of standards, there are some standards. They're already there. These are the Web Content Accessibility Enormous Mouthful Standards, WCAG 2.1 they're called. So they've been around, I think, since about 98, and they were on the most recent version. So they work under these 4 kind of themes, and then there's 12 categories under the themes, and then there's all the different standards underneath those. So they're pretty easy. They use the acronym POUR. So perceivable, they have to be able to understand that it exists. People have to be able to, understandable as well. People have to be able to understand the language, the contextual information, the menuing system. They have to be able to understand your wonderful information architecture. Has to be some way in their brain. Operable, which means, of course, that they have to be, there has to be ways to navigate it that are simple. You can have some custom way to navigate it, like we all used to do when we built Flash websites. And robust, probably have to rag on Flash again for this, is that they can't, rely on some proprietary thing. They have to use, standard features and standard technologies that are available for everyone. So I'm just going to take a dive into some of these kind of do's and don'ts and examples that we can look at. So the first on the do's and don'ts is designing for users with low vision, because again, this is the most popular. This is the one that people are well aware of. So the do's are over here on the left, and your don'ts are on the right. So again, an obvious one that you see all the time messed up on the web is that the text is too small and the contrast is too low and you can't read it. And this is a nightmare for pretty much everyone that doesn't have perfect vision. So anyone older, anyone that's colorblind, anyone that has partial vision, they really find it hard to read small, low contrast text. My personal favorite is the only using color to convey meaning, because it's the one that we've all used and designers love to use, where in order to indicate a status change, you just change the color of the thing from red to green. And that happens to be the number one type of color blindness, is the inability to distinguish between red and green. So that one always gives me a bit of a chuckle. Actually, a friend of mine got a job in a meat factory when he was 16. And it was only then that he discovered that he was colorblind, because the guy was talking about these row of green buttons and this row of red buttons, and he was like, what's going on here? So the next category is designer for users with physical or motor disabilities. So this is more of a this is kind of, again, people you might think of kind of slightly less. So favorite ones here are kind of making things large and clickable. I'm pretty sure that 99.8% of all radio buttons and checkboxes on the web are about 10 pixels wide, and they are impossible for people with motor difficulties. And the thing about motor difficulties as well is that you only have a certain window in your life where you have refined motor function. When you're a child, you don't have it, and as you get older, you start to lose it. So it's one of these things that will affect everyone, and the tiny radio buttons really they're one of those things that they really kill those people. The other one then is the next one. Is do's and don'ts designer for users of screen readers. So this is one of my favorite ones. I think this is one of the ones where you can get a lot of bang for your buck from, even though it's quite difficult at the start. So obviously structured HTML content in your front end, it is a good development practice, and it's also a good design practice, because screen readers can read those tags and understand where they're supposed to go next and tell the user what type of element they're looking at. And I think we've all designed and built websites that are just div all the way to hell. And this is kind of, nobody wants to do that, but they end up doing it. And again, the idea of having these objective measures, something you can say, well, we can't do it that way because we've got accessibility needs. The other one as well is building for keyboard only use. So I often find with older software where the mouse wasn't a thing, this is often better. So I used to work in the insurance industry, and a lot of the administration platforms are on mainframe. And those are, the black screen with the green letters, and you can't use a mouse on those. And you would be so surprised how fast people can use those machines. They're incredibly fast. They hated most of the software that we built for them because they had to use the mouse. By comparison to a keyboard, the mouse is incredibly slow. And so this is just a nice example of, like, if you're designing software for power users, for professional users, for people who have to get through things quickly, especially forms. I mean, most websites are just one form after the other. Allowing them to do it on a keyboard makes life a lot easier. So you're meeting the accessibility need and making everyone else's life better and making your product better as well. So the final coolest thing is that most of this stuff is just good design practice that most people are doing anyway. I don't think people are unaware of most of what I've said. They're probably unaware of some of the things that are on the long tail, but it's more about making accessibility a priority, making it part of our practice, ensuring that we, instead of almost getting to the standards kind of by accident, just by being, good at design and good at building stuff already, that we get all the way there and get over that little hump to make it conform to the standards and make it much more accessible and much more usable by much more people. It's just an example of this page I just dug around today. If you want to look at some accessible sites, the BBC is a great one. It would be, I suppose, the misconception about accessible sites is that they're ugly with massive texts and, boxes that go over everything. And I think that if you look at the BBC site or any of the UK government sites, you'll see that they use familiar patterns. They're excellent to use. They're nice to look at, and it's just a good resource. And also the other thing as well to say is that the technology is there. The web technology has been around for a long time. There's plenty of resources out there. It's just, I think that the industry hasn't really caught up with the technology to use what's there and use what we have, because we have the tech and the standards. So it follows that we should start using them. And yeah, so the last thing then is just this accessibility starter kit. For if you're interested in what I'm saying, and you say, well, maybe I'll give that a go. Where will I start? I think the slides are being shared. If not, my contact details are at the end, and you can ask me for it. But it just shows different links. One is the Universal Design kind of website, just to show where everything came from. It can be a nice background. The guidelines, the overview is an excellent read, and then the guidelines themselves are simple and intuitive and not onerous to read. It's not like a massive document that's difficult to get through. Microsoft's Inclusive Design Toolkit is a brilliant resource. It's well designed. It's very pretty. It's very enjoyable to read. I used 3 of those do's and don'ts posters. I took them from the UK Home Office website. They're there, available for anyone to download. There's more of them. I just did a little subsection. For nerds who like books, there's books, and there's actually very few books. That's one of the very few ones, but it's excellent. And then just a couple of little things. So Atkinson Hyperlegible is the typeface that I've used to make this. It's recent. There have been other ones in the past, and this is the most recent one I found. It was made for the American Braille Institute or organization or something. But there's that links to the blog that explains how it was designed and gives kind of a lot of links to some of their source material. And you can download the font for free as well. I think it's on Google. And then I just threw in the Ars Technica article about the Domino's case for people if they want to kind of read a little bit more about the legal intrigue. And then one more kind of resource is this kind of shit game that I made with some friends last year for Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So the idea is it's effectively a quiz, and it mimics some accessibility needs, and then asks you to answer questions based on kind of having to navigate those difficulties. So this is linked here in the presentation as well, but I can share the link after too. It'll only take 5 minutes, and it is actually a bit of fun, and it's a good thing to spread around with your teams to kind of raise awareness, because you kind of, it's at least something to do. The name is terrible and it looks terrible, but it's actually not that terrible. So yeah, the last thing to say is thanks to Leo and Casey for having me. It was really great. And there's my contact details. If you want to follow up with anything I've said or want to learn more, that's just really the very tip of the iceberg when it comes to actually working on accessibility. There's a whole load more of kind of practical things, everyday things for your job. And the very, very last thing to say, I think, is come work at Toast. They said I could say this, so do. We're hiring all sorts of people, and that's not even right. We're even hiring the mean ones, so don't be put off if you're mean. We do the money exchange for labor thing that everyone does. It's just like that. And if you don't like it, we will definitely get your old job back for free. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Martin. I really loved your talk, and I especially loved how it showed how there's so many more resources out there for developers who want to make their websites more accessible. There's just so many standards, and it's becoming even easier now.
Yeah, and there really isn't the tip of the iceberg when it comes to like developer resources. They get better and better all the time, and a lot of them are built into browsers now as well. I know Firefox and Chrome both have accessibility resources built into them. It is getting better and better and better.
Yeah, I'm really impressed. I think that really got my attention at the beginning was the number that you shared about the amount of people in America right now that has some disability. And for me, it's not just a thing to take care of people, but I think to take care of the business actually, because those people has money to expand. It's important to the organization to care of those also.
I don't know, it sounds cynical, but like, I suppose I would say, like, don't lead with your empathy. I know that's I know people like this word, but if you're trying to get someone to, to put this into a sprint, don't lead with the empathy. Lead with the, look how much money we could possibly lose over time if we don't do this. It's just a more compelling argument.
Business language.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So if you could give an advice for someone that is begin on the web development world, um, and would like to learn more about about accessibility, what do you think is the very, very, very early step that a person should walk through?
I think like the very early steps are. I suppose that's why I created that little. Sorry, I'll just pull it up there. That little. I mean, this is a good step. At least get you into thinking about it. But when it comes to like actually doing it, when it comes into development stuff, I think the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit is really good. It goes into a lot more detail about the technicalities of it. You'd have to kind of couple it with reading at the guidelines, and like the guidelines are not that bad. So I know people are like, "Oh no, the documentation, what'll I do?" They're well written and they're short, and like I have most of them in my head, and it's not as if I sat down and like learned them off or anything. But I think those are two very good ones. And these posters are actually really good as well. You can stick them up in the office. I had them in my old office. They're pretty and they're nice to look at, and you know they remind you of the various needs that you have to cater for. But yeah.
All right.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you, and indeed, thanks for having me. I do appreciate it.
Great. And I will introduce our next speaker, which is Saoirse Kennedy, and she's all right with it. I'll just bring her on right now to just have a pre-chat. So, hello.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, Saoirse.
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your background before you start?
Yeah, sure. I think I'll repeat some of this later on, but yeah, I'm Saoirse. I'm from County Kerry, so I had to get that in somewhere. But I work for Genesis, so I'm an associate designer for Genesis in Galway. And so at the moment I'm working from home. Fingers crossed we'll get back into the office someday. But unlike the two fabulous speakers that spoke before me, I'm pretty new to industry. So I graduated from college a year ago. So still learning, still having a great time. So yeah, that's pretty much me.
How did you get started in design?
Well, I guess I was always quite creative as opposed to like artistic. It kind of always had that, like, you know, always thinking about things in a slightly different way and how could things be improved, or I suppose how can I help someone. And then my degree was fairly broad, you know, lots of different kind of creative aspects and different things in tech. And then I just fell into user experience, and I loved it since the first day. So I haven't gone anywhere else since.
What do you particularly like about the field?
I guess it's everything, and it's one of those questions I get asked quite often as well. And even at work, you know, we're trying to set goals, and you know, we're trying to do all different things. But even like Martin's talk there with accessibility, I think was absolutely fantastic. Like we recently did some accessibility training at work, and I think there's just so much unawareness about the simple things. Like I know Martin covered like the colors and that kind of stuff, but the side of being able to improve things for people with either temporary or other kind of types of disabilities, you're improving it for everyone, which isn't the way that I thought about it recently. But all parts of design, probably more on the user experience side versus the user interface side. But yeah, everything and anything.
If you don't have any questions, Leo, I guess I can let you start.
Yeah, I guess we are good to go.
Cool. I will bring up your slides then.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay.
Go ahead.
Am I good to go? Okay. So hi everyone. As I just covered, I'm going to speak to you a little bit today about how to be a dev ally, and in specifics, how to work with developers from a designer point of view. So again, hello, I'm Saoirse, and I'm an associate product designer at Genesis. So as I mentioned, I'm currently working from home, but definitely hope to get back to lovely Galway at some stage. So to get started, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and how I ended up at Genesis. So in school, very creative. I suppose I love music, dancing, singing, all that jazz. But I also really loved technical drawing, or tech graph that people might know it as. So what I loved was kind of taking a problem and trying to see, without, before I've even begun, kind of what it might look like at the finished product, and when we get to the end, what it might look like if it was to be released into the real world as such. And I also quite liked maths. I wasn't particularly strong at maths, but what I did like was the satisfaction of solving a problem that maybe I didn't think that I'd be able to solve, and kind of going through the process of following process and procedure and all that kind of thing. So when it came to make a decision for college, I decided to go to CIT in Cork. It's now known as MTU, so the Munster Technological University. And the course that I chose was called Creative Digital Media. So as I mentioned earlier, it was kind of a broad enough undergrad. So we did a small bit of programming, some bits of HTML, CSS, and some JavaScript, but nothing crazy. We were building small portfolio websites and that kind of things. Also did quite a bit of animation, and really loved that side of thing. But what it was lacking for me personally was the kind of solving problems for a user. Although you are learning new skills and technologies and kind of new ways of doing things all the time, it doesn't have that impact of kind of helping someone at the end. A lot of the time, sometimes it does. We also did some film production, so editing, that kind of things. And obviously we also did some user experience design, user experience research, and also some user interface design. So as you can probably all guess by the fact that I'm speaking here today, user experience anyway was by far my favorite part of the course. I'm the oldest of 4 siblings, so I've always kind of liked the idea of being able to help people, and I found that I was able to do that through design in some way. And I think Martin called it the warm and fuzzy feeling earlier on this, but I definitely have that, is, you know, the satisfaction you get when you realize that you can help someone, even if it is like the smallest part of their day. I just really like the idea that you can kind of have an impact. So in my 3rd year of college, I got the opportunity to become an intern in Genesis in Galway. So I was a UX intern for 9 months. And at the time, the team was quite small. So there was, I think, about 3 of us in the Galway office, and there was some designers that worked in America and other parts of the world. But at the time, we didn't work kind of as close as we would with them now. But this was a fantastic opportunity. So if anyone here is familiar with Joe Smith, he says Genesis interns don't make coffee, which is definitely true. Everyone is given a chance to contribute and have a certain level of responsibility and kind of get stuck in and learn new skills and new techniques. So yeah, this was a fantastic opportunity, I suppose, for me to be in the office in Galway, kind of surrounded by product managers and mainly developers, you know, so there was only 3 of us to quite a lot of developers at the time. And I mean, you're sitting in the middle of all different kinds of people, so you get to see what makes them tick, you get to see, you know, how to work with them, and also how they like to work firsthand. So it really was a fantastic learning opportunity. But before I go any further, I have a big disclaimer to make. So I finished my undergrad in May 2020, and I started with Genesis in June 2020 after my degree. So I've just passed my 1-year work anniversary. And unlike the 2 fabulous speakers before me, I don't have multiple years of experience in all different industries and different roles. So when I was asked to do this talk first, my initial reaction was, sure, what do I know that, you know, anyone would want to listen to? But the more I thought about it, you know, I know I don't learn it. I know I don't know everything, and I'm learning every day. I don't know anyone that does know everything. And anyone that says they do, I'd like to challenge you on that. So just a disclaimer, I'm finding my feet. I'm still on the way there. So going back to my internship, so kind of my first impressions when I first started in the office, I suppose. One of the first things that I noticed, which I'm sure will be familiar to lots of people here, is developers love acronyms, abbreviations, and using technical language. Now, it isn't fair of me to say that this is specific to developers and it's not specific to Genesis, but like everything, it's something that's, you hate them at first, and I think you learn to love them after a while. But I remember when I first started my placement or my internship, I brought like a notebook around, and all the back pages were just full of acronyms, and I had to kind of Google after meetings what every one of them meant and write them down just so I wouldn't forget them for the next time. So yeah, just kind of first step in the door, first impressions, this was something that I noticed, like, whoa, these people are speaking in a language that I do not understand. And one of my other first impressions, I suppose, was when I left college, I had this huge preconception of who a designer was versus who a developer was. And in my head, a designer would go around the place with Sharpies and sticky notes and Crayolas, as some people would say, and they're really creative, love working in huge groups of people, looking at the big picture, and love workshops and that kind of thing. And I also assumed that, you know, developers were the complete opposite. They're very analytical, very logical, very introverted. If anyone's seen The Matrix, in my head, that's how I saw a developer to be. They saw the world in code and kind of, again, like the movies, liked working in a little dark room by themselves. But again, it was challenged on this. So one of the things we do in Genesis is, well, I'm sure loads of other people have done it as well, is kind of icebreakers at the start of collaboration and working sessions. So at the start of, say, a design sprint or a workshop, we do maybe a 30-second or a few minute icebreaker just to get people used to speaking in a group and getting used to the technology and working together. And one of the ones we did recently was this what you see on the screen now. So you had to pick from each of the rows, right or left. So are you more creative, more analytical? Do you prefer the big picture or do you prefer the details? And what I was quite surprised to find is, you know, it's not a one size fits all. Not all creative designers are super extroverted. And in fact, my team in Galway, most of us would be more introverted than extroverted. And that's for a design team. And it's true for developers on the flip as well. So I guess it's just something about, you know, roles are a word for something that people output at the end of the day, or maybe how they spend a portion of their day. But it's by no means a definition of how someone wants to work, you know, or how someone wants to live their life. You know, it's not a personality trait. So that was just another one of those big kind of, wow, you know, these developer folk are all right. So onto the topic of the talk, how to be a dev ally. So the first point is speak my language. And so as I mentioned, when I first started, and even when I returned, kind of first kind of building that relationship with developers, I really noticed that we weren't speaking the same language. People were using all these words and I just didn't understand what they were saying. And the same was kind of the reverse. You know, I was using some words and people are looking at me with their heads a little bit tilted thinking, what is wrong with this one here? But now I realize it's not in my head that we were thinking different languages. We actually were. So when you think about it, I had gone through 4 years of education, and so had the developer sitting on the other side of the room to me. And also they had a load of wealth of experience of learning how to think in problems very different ways to how I was taught to think about problems. And they think about using different mediums. They think about producing something very differently at the end of the day. So just to explain this a little more, if you think about the last time you were abroad on holidays in a country that didn't speak your language, so I'm sure that is a very long time ago for a lot of people on this call, unfortunately. But if you imagine, you know, you have to go out for dinner. So if you're anything like my family, you'll spend a long time scrolling through loads of different websites or walking through the streets, looking at different restaurants, deciding where to eat because everyone wants something different. So you finally sit down and the waiting staff come over and said, okay, we're ready to take your order, but trickier is they don't have any English or very broken English and you can't really speak their language. And another spanner is the work is, imagine that you had just found out that you had to completely change your diet. So you're no longer allowed to eat meat, dairy or gluten. You know, it's a big deal for you. It's something that has been really thrown up. So if you're at home, if you're on the street in Cork or Dublin or Galway, you might have a chat with the waiter and explain the situation. And, you know, you might even tell them why you had to change your diet in a big long story, because I think specifically in Ireland, sure, we love a chat. But you can't do that here. Your communication barrier is really high because there's a big wall between you. You can't speak their language and they can't speak yours. So what do? You look a little carefully and you look for these fun little coloured icons, which are mainly universally recognised. So you can understand by the kind of barley or wheat on the top, you know, you can't have gluten. It's the same with fish. People can't have fish. So all of a sudden you've taken away the need for the kind of language or vocal communication between the two. So instead of needing to tell the waiter a big long story, now you can just point and say, I want this, because you're confident that you can eat it and you know what's inside in it. So it's exactly the same when we think about how you speak to someone that doesn't necessarily think the same as you or comes from a different discipline. So speaking in a super technical language or speaking in referencing all these design heuristics that the other person doesn't understand, it leaves an awful lot of room for mistakes and misunderstanding. And it also means that the person you're speaking to spends an awful lot of time trying to understand what you're saying and they completely miss the why. So like me at the beginning, when some people were trying to explain these concepts to me, I'm so busy trying to understand what all these acronyms mean that I don't actually understand any of the work that they're trying to explain. So yeah, actions speak louder than words. And to that point, that's one of the reasons why collaborative working has been so successful for me in my short career so far, but also for the teams that we've worked on at work. So something we do is design sprints. So it's, for anyone that's not familiar, it's about 2 full days of workshops using design thinking methodologies and exercises, followed by 2 full days of prototyping, and then you put that in front of users to be tested and you go from there. But one of my favorite things we do as part of design sprints is lightning demos and sketches. So what it is it gives everyone in the room, from developers, product managers, sales, designers, a chance to get all their ideas out of their head and onto paper. And when it comes with that, once it's on paper or on the screen, it removes the need for someone to explain what they're thinking, or it removes a lot of the kind of the words you might need to explain the idea to somewhere else, because how I might describe a piece of work or an idea could be interpreted by someone else completely differently. But once you put it on the screen or on the piece of paper, I can understand now where you're coming from, and you can ask the questions then. So it's exactly the same as ordering the restaurant. Instead of telling the long-winded story, once it's on paper, it's on the screen, you can point and say, like this. So to that point, it's finding easy if you're solving simple problems, but most of us in the tech industry, we work with wicked problems. So how do you break that down as a team using the show me, don't tell me? So I took this from a TED Talk. His name is on the screen. You can look it up if you want to. It is really interesting. But the concept of show me, don't tell me is something that we actually use in everyday life. I'm not sure about you, but often I'd say, I can't see it, or I'd need to see it to understand it. It's something I'd say quite often. So this is an exercise used sometimes, and it's called, so tell me how to make toast. So if I said to you, tell me how to make toast, you might think at first, oh, that's easy. I know what I'm doing. But once you break it down, some people could break it down to 3 steps. Some people could break it down to 50 steps. Some people could focus on, what they put on the toast at the end of it. Some more kind of engineering focused people will look at the mechanics of the toaster. And all of a sudden, we've gone from having a mutual understanding of how you make toast to actually we're thinking about this problem in a very different way. So what my kind of point is here, it's not until you break a problem down to the complete simplest level that you can understand, and put it on paper. And you don't have to be very good at drawing. You can just put a few squiggles and a few lines, but once you put it down, it removes the need to explain things, and it removes that kind of risk of misinterpretation and misunderstanding. And this important thing is you've got people with complete different skill sets all doing the same thing. So it's not the designer dictating what the drawing should be, or what should come next. It's everyone working together to see what the problem actually is at its core. Okay, next is one of my favorite things to talk about, and it's called the curious idiot. So instead of rambling, I'm going to play a short 2-minute video. Someone will have to let me know if you can't hear the sound, but I'm going to hit play.
I'm an idiot. And I'm not being flip about it. I don't understand very complicated things. And so I ask a lot of questions so that the person who's telling me something complicated, who's talking in terms as if I understand them, finance or neuroscience, I don't know what you're talking about. Right. And I ask enough questions just so that I understand it. So is what you're saying this? No, that's not what I'm saying. Well, what are you? So I'll give you a perfect example. So a long time ago, I had a client. They were a public company, and they brought me on to do some work for them. But they invited me to sit in on a meeting from the consultant that they had hired. And so all the C-level executives and me, and this consultant was giving a presentation about something or other.
This is your marketing.
This is when I had my little marketing company, and all the C-level executives sitting there nodding and taking notes on the PowerPoint that they had printed up in front of them, and I had it as well, and I didn't understand a frickin' word of it. Yeah. Right. I was like looking around, like, yeah, and so I'd raise my hand and say, I'm really, really sorry. I know I'm the only person in this room without an MBA, but this doesn't make sense. Like, you say A plus B equals C, but based on your logic, A plus B equals D. Can you just say it again, please? I'm really sorry to slow the meeting down, everybody. You know, and you could see the consultant getting frustrated with me and would try and explain it again. I said, I'm so sorry. And one by one, all the C-level executives said, yeah, I don't understand it either. Now, if the idiot hadn't spoken up and said, I don't understand, they all would have nodded their heads for fear of looking stupid because they don't understand. And they would have paid a lot of money for a document they didn't understand, and they would never have used it and would have sat on a shelf. And it's because I'm okay being the idiot. Like, that's why I'm not being flip. I'm okay everybody in the room going, oh, because I have to ask questions until I understand it. But the reality is once I can get to the point where
So yeah, what Simon covered there in that video is something that took me quite a bit of time to become comfortable with, but it has also become one of the most helpful tools in my arsenal when working with particularly technical people, or in particular developers. So sometimes when you're working in a tech company, you know, most of the people there, everyone there is there because they deserve to be there. They're all highly educated people, and they're really smart, and they can grasp really complicated concepts quite fast. But when you take a step and you realize, you know, well, hang on, I actually don't really understand here, you start to kind of come up with maybe alternate solutions that you wouldn't have come up with in the first place. So this comes in the territory of probably being a UX designer, that we are sometimes the voice of users in meetings, quite often more than not. But this does not mean we are the users, but by asking questions and asking people to simplify things or maybe explain it in a different way, it allows the whole team to kind of think, oh, well, maybe we hadn't thought of something, or they can kind of question, or maybe there's something we left out. Hang on, maybe we can try something differently. But by standing up and being brave and asking the stupid questions, it also means that everyone is definitely on the same page. So like what I mentioned before, with the waiter, sometimes you can order something, and I'm sure it's happened to someone here, that you order something and it comes out completely different, and like the disappointment is something else. Maybe it's something that you don't like at all and you can't even eat it. But it's miscommunication. So by asking those silly questions, or those stupid questions, as some people may say, it allows everyone to get on the same page and work towards that shared goal, and often comes up with ideas that you wouldn't have thought of beforehand. And it's like, as Martin covered before, it's not just a case of making people happy. Like, it's, you know, of course you will come up with a better product if you're all working towards a shared goal, but there's money at stake here. When people like make mistakes, or there's a big, huge misunderstanding for the restaurant, it might be 30 minutes and, you know, some chef time in the food. But in case of R&D, if there's a miscommunication, sometimes that can go on for weeks or months. And like, I don't need to tell anyone here the cost involved with a mistake like that, but a silly mistake that could have been resolved just by someone being brave and speaking up. So the next thing I wanted to cover was, what do you see here? So I'm gonna read everyone's mind and say, you might see a man underneath a pile of boxes. You might just see boxes, or maybe you're thinking about a recent move house and you're getting terrible flashbacks to all the packing. But what if you take a step back and look through it in a slightly different lens? So maybe to someone like a child, they might see a fort or a castle, or they might see a wonderland, something like the Lion, the Witch, and the cardboard boxes, maybe. But this is something that we refer to as childhood wonderment. Well, it's kind of an industry term. But the way I like to think about it is this perspective. Like, it's a different way of thinking. It's putting on a different hat and looking at a problem differently to how you would have looked at it before. And this is what I see as being the absolute magic thing when you work in a three in a box model. It's all about perspective. So three in a box, for anyone that's not familiar, it's one developer, one product manager, and one designer working really closely together to solve a problem. And as I mentioned, like, we've all gone through different training. We've all worked in different roles in our past. So you're always going to look at something slightly differently. So to one person, they might see the pile of boxes, but the other person might see Narnia, and the other person might see the castle or something. You know, it's just about bringing different perspectives together to work towards a shared goal. And it isn't all about just coming up with this magically creative solution. It is actually proven to work towards a better solution that is more beneficial to the user and to the business in the end. And so yeah, collaboration, teamwork, and perspective. And it's all about kind of people just looking at problems in a slightly different way, but also working really closely together to get towards that shared goal. So I'm sure everyone here is familiar with working in kind of an agile way, but it's, I suppose, the way that we all work now is really closely together. So you can't, as my manager would say, you can't design something and throw it over the wall and never look at it again. There is a relationship that needs to be formed, and people need to work together, specifically from UX and developers, so that engineering, to work together towards that shared goal. Yeah, so we'll move on. So I've mentioned design sprints before, and so that's something that we do in Genesis. I'm sure most of the other tech companies here as well. But something that we often do is, trying to find out where that innovation part is. So you've got the business viability, technical viability, and customer desirability. And just the one point I wanted to make here is, you can't do these things by yourself. As much as if you are introverted or you are extroverted, you can't just run away. Like, I can't tell you what the technical feasibility for a piece of work is, nor do I need to. But by working as a team and working towards that shared goal, then, innovation is a lot better. So one of the last things I wanted to talk about was basic understanding. So it's all well and good to say, oh yeah, we work as a team, but you have some developers that still don't know what user experience is, and you have some designers that will have no idea about what it is developers actually do other than sit behind their desk and do some kind of code. So it is really important to have that shared level of understanding. It's just at least the basics. So it's being able to kind of speak a common language and ask questions, and having a level of just kind of basic understanding. So I can understand to a certain degree when a developer is telling me something that it can or can't be done. That doesn't mean that I can write the code, but I still understand what they're saying. And the same goes for reverse. So a developer does not need to be able to create wireframes or user flows, but they do need to understand why the decisions are being made. So to finish, I'm just going to go through 5 top tips of how to be a dev ally, which will kind of summarize some of the things I've rambled on about in the last 20 minutes. So the first one, honesty is the best policy. If you don't understand something, you're only fooling yourself by staying quiet. And this is a two-way street. This is both developers asking the designer decisions about what design maybe heuristics they've done, or maybe what policies or methodologies they've followed if they don't understand why choices have been made. And the same goes to reverse. By asking questions, you're only going to add clarification for everyone. So sometimes it's better not to sit in silence. Next one is don't be afraid to challenge each other. So nobody is right 100% of the time. And just to clarify, I do not recommend anyone goes into the office with boxing gloves, because that would only end very badly. But what I do recommend is that you have the courage to challenge the people you work with. And that's how you're going to build a relationship, by, either asking them to explain why they made a decision, or maybe say, well, have you thought about this in a slightly different way? And maybe you need to go away and get more research, or you need to go and test something maybe really quick. But you can't build a relationship with someone you're working with just by accepting everything they do. So you need to understand the basics, but also don't be afraid to challenge them. But in the same breath, you need to use your skill set. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, we've got builders building a house. Now, I've never built a house. I will never build a house, nor do I ever want to build a house. So I would not tell the builder how to build a house. And the same goes for the tech industry. So you can't get designers telling developers, well, I actually don't think that's how you should write that, or we should do it differently, and the same is vice versa. You can challenge each other in a respectful way that moves you towards that shared goal without telling someone what to do in a skill set that isn't yours. Understand and respect each other. So it's all to do with kind of relationship, but you would have seen a lot about respect in the media recently. Give respect, get respect. And it's very true. You need to have that common understanding of where the person you're working with is coming from, but you also need to respect. So you can challenge them in a respectful way, but you can only do that when you understand where they're coming from. So you just need to ask questions and work with each other. And finally, as the African proverb said, it takes a village to raise a child. So it's going to be a very long and lonely road if you want to bring something like a product to market all by yourself, or if you don't want to work with the designers and developers about you. So why not do it faster, better, and have some fun along the way? Because teamwork makes the dream work. And so I think that's all my slides. If anyone has questions for me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm a bit old-fashioned, so I'm not using Twitter at the moment. So I hope someone found something interesting here. And feel free to reach out if you've got any questions or comments.
Great. Thank you so much. I particularly liked the bit about asking questions because it really is something that can feel so intimidating, but it's very likely if you have a question, somebody else has the same question, and it's so important to be on the same page.
Yeah. And I think it's something that people can find intimidating, and particularly when you're newer in your career, you know, you're in a meeting or you're in a room with people that have got like 50 years experience or thereabouts, and sometimes you can feel that your questions are silly, whereas in reality it might have just been something that they haven't thought about before. So it does take a lot of confidence, I think, to ask those silly questions, but as Simon Sinek said, someone has to ask the questions, you know, because otherwise they'll just go as miscommunications for people moving forward, and they will cause problems at some stage if someone doesn't ask the questions.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, so sorry. Just one thought and one question. Yeah, I was really thinking about wear my box clothes and fight against Martin on the office, but yeah, as you advise, I will not do it.
Yeah,
But
please
j-
don't.
just going one step above, like your tips about interactions between developers and designer was amazing. I'm a software engineer, and I completely understand the scenario that you showed there. And but going up to the management level, what do you think that a manager could promote in his team to make that interaction happen in a better way, to promote a better communication uh, in a very high level? What do you think? Like workshops, setting up meetings. What is your personal opinion about it?
My own opinion is like it would be very difficult to do on a management level, because it's not a case of, you know, just throwing two people into a room and say, here, go figure it out. Like, it is a relationship the same as any other relationship. So like even at work, you'd have silly things like you'd meet people at the office, obviously before COVID, and you chat to someone making coffee, that and then you find out, oh, actually they're going away for the weekend, and you start to get to know things about them outside of work, which allows you to have more of a relationship. So then it turns away from someone telling you, no, you can't do this, to, oh, actually, can you explain to me why we can't do this? And then there's a common level of understanding there. So like workshops are a great, and like even the silly icebreakers, like we do some silly ones sometimes. It'd be like, find your favorite GIF, or, you know, what's your favorite food? But when I know your favorite food is pizza, oh, hang on, mine is too. And that's something else to talk about. And it just makes everything a little bit more human, I think. It takes out the technology out of it.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, perfectly understood. Thank you very much.
Thank
No
you
problem.
so much for sharing with us.
No worries.
All right. And our next speaker is Elisa Lundberg, who I will bring up now just for a quick introduction. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Hey, Elisa,
Good, how are you?
welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
So there's a little bit of time before you start. So could you just tell us a bit about your background?
Sure. So I'm a user researcher at Google on the Firebase team. I've been at Google for about 2.5 years, been a user researcher for over 10 years. I think I'm going to stop counting officially, not remind myself of that number. And I've done all sorts of user research, different product areas. So I started in a consultancy doing a lot of food and beverage work as well as packaged good work. And then I've been in the tech industry for a while, worked with digital creators at Twitter as well as the finance industry before coming to Google. So yeah, I focus on qualitative research. So I talk to people a lot. Sometimes I run surveys, but I'm not a data scientist, for anyone who's
Great. Sounds good. Well, I'll let you go ahead and start. So we will pull away.
Great. And my slides should be up. That's perfect. And is the audio okay? I was getting a little bit of feedback, so I just want to make sure everything's
sounds good to me.
Okay, perfect. Cool. Well, thank you so much again for having me. Today I'll be talking about usability testing. And I will say, Darren, our first speaker, queued this up really well by saying, you are not your user. I will also sort of preface this with letting you know that this talk might be most interesting for folks who are thinking about doing usability testing on their own. So if you have a startup or a side project that you're thinking about, the reason for that is because those of you who are working at larger companies might already have someone like me doing this work sort of within your company. I'll be talking a little bit about what user research is and sort of why we might want to do it, but then also diving into some of the more nitty-gritty details of how you'd go about doing usability testing specifically. And I will ask that if the organizers could let me know if there's any questions at the end. I'm happy to stick around and answer those as well. So as we dive in, I'm just thinking about what is the dream? When we build apps, when we build products, the dream is always we're going to run out of the gate, hit the target, and we're going to learn along the way. The nightmare, of course, the flip side is that we'll learn along the way, but we don't actually hit the target. Maybe we miss out on that product market fit. Maybe the app is complex or hard to use. Maybe, as our first speaker mentioned, participants just can't find, or users just can't find the button. They can't find their shopping cart and you don't sell anything. It's really expensive, and it's really sad when that happens because you are going through your entire product development lifecycle before you learn. User research lets us reduce risk sort of as we go along. We're going to be learning based on prototypes, based on early fidelity mocks throughout the product development life cycle. So at no point are you really investing all of your engineering time, all of your design time into something where you have one shot at success. You get to learn at each step of the way and de-risk as you go. Because you're going to be doing something that's really iterative as well, you get a chance to try again. If you try something out and it actually isn't working for your users, you get to go back, redesign, try again. We'll talk about how we do that. So before I jump into how we do that, I wanted to bring up that there's a lot of different kinds of user research out there. The one that I always give as an example is focus groups. I haven't actually done a focus group in probably about 5 years, but focus groups tends to be the thing that people imagine when they think about user research. So if I'm at a cocktail party, I'm trying to explain my job, people sort of have this image in mind. Another one that developers might be familiar with or already doing is A/B testing, large-scale testing of your app. You might be doing data mining or a logs analysis where you're looking at where are your users going in your app, what activities are they doing. If you've ever seen an email survey or received sort of you're on a website and you see a little pop-up that asks for your opinion, sort of an intercept survey in the bottom right there. Lots of different ways of attracting our users' attention and getting feedback from them as we go along. However, for this particular talk, we're going to be talking about usability testing, specifically usability studies. Usability studies let us understand how our users see our product and how they expect our product to work, where they think they should be clicking, what features they think it should have. We also get to understand their pain points. So what's not working? What are they getting stuck on or confused by? And things like that. I will say one thing that usability testing and user research as a whole is not really the best tool for is getting our users to solve the problems for us. Possibly because I'm an American, I hear the Henry Ford quote quite a lot. If I had asked my users what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. As a user researcher, I think that's actually very informative. That tells you the pain point right there. The user wants a faster horse. Their horse is too slow. That's what they want. That's what they want improved. What it doesn't tell you, the sort of bounds of that information, is that the user doesn't have the business lens, the technical feasibility lens to solve that problem of horse slowness. They know they want it to be faster. They aren't looking down the road to see that there's a whole new method of transportation that's becoming available and is going to get to them soon. That's where interpreting your data and understanding sort of what your users need combined with what your business can deliver really comes into play. Usability testing is also really versatile. It's the kind of thing where once you learn how to do it, you can apply it to different features in your app, different products that you might work on. It's pretty lightweight. It sounds like it would be hard. It sounds like, okay, we could just build, or we could build a little bit, stop, talk to people. I don't know, maybe that takes a little time. But it's actually something that you can get done in a few days or a week. And you could iterate and sort of try it over and over again, making sure that you're getting to that successful launch as you're going. Because it can be lightweight and because it is so versatile, there's a huge return on investment. You can save yourself a lot of time in the long run and save your team a lot of time in the long run by understanding that you're on the right path, and if not, correcting as you go. Okay, so what does this actually look like? Hopefully between this talk thus far and the talks you've already heard today, you're pretty sold that getting feedback from users is a good idea. How are we going to do that? So I'm going to share a 6-step process. You're going to identify your app's critical tasks, identify the core users. You're going to recruit users to actually participate in this testing that you want to do with them. You're going to run the test. You're going to give them tasks to complete. You're going to ask them follow-up questions. Then you're going to think about that. You're going to apply that business lens, the technical feasibility lens. You're going to see if there's trends in the feedback that you're getting. And then you're going to iterate your product. That's the iteration piece. That's where you get to learn as you go so that you're getting incrementally closer to the successful launch. And you're going to rinse and repeat. So the first step is to identify your app's critical tasks. Here I'm going to identify 3 to 5 tasks that your users are going to do with your product or with your app. 3 to 5 might not feel like enough. Maybe there's a lot of steps. Maybe there's a lot of features that you're launching. The iterative part of this comes in here as well. You really only have 45 to 60 minutes with a user to get their feedback in any given session. After that, you get tired, they get tired, the feedback's not quite as solid. So you want to figure out what are the top 3 to 5 things that you're working on right now that you can improve right now. You're going to prioritize those, test them, improve them, move on and pick the next several things. You want to agree with your stakeholders, whoever you're working with in your organization that's part of this decision making, not just what these tasks are, but also what does success look like? What does failure look like? What priority do they have if there is a trade-off to be made? And we think about tasks as toothbrush tasks and pivotal tasks. A toothbrush task is something that is really habitual. Users are doing it over and over and over again, multiple times a day. They're doing it daily. Something like texting or sending email. Whereas a pivotal task is something that maybe they're only doing a few times, but it's really important to success. Something like account creation, for example. I also like to think about this as tolerance for annoyance. So if you think about something that's just a little bit annoying, it's not the most convenient it can be, but it's not a big deal. But then you think of that as being something that users are going to be doing multiple times a day, and every time they do this, it's a little bit annoying. It's kind of a big deal. It sort of sums to something that might detract from your users and cause them to churn, from the user experience and cause them to churn. Similarly, if you have a pivotal task, but it's critical, but it's done by maybe a small number of power users a couple of times a year, not saying that's not important to improve. It could be something really important like administering accounts for their organization. You have to get it right. But there might be a little bit of tolerance for it being inconvenient if it's infrequent. And that's something you're going to think about balancing when you decide which of these to prioritize first. Cool. Now we're going to talk about identifying the core users for your app. The reason we do this is because things aren't built for everyone. Sometimes we think like, oh, everyone's going to use this, everyone's going to love this. I feel like even big government enterprises aren't built for everyone. They're built for the residents of that country, right? So you want to think about who are your users? If it is a very wide user base, is there a particular group that you're targeting right now? Maybe they're higher spenders, or maybe you've historically had a hard time reaching them and you want to make sure you're accommodating them as well. You're going to think about how these users describe themselves, what their interests are, what behaviors they have. This is really thinking about who do you want feedback from and how do you identify them. So when we think about who we want feedback from and who we want, and how do they identify themselves and how might we identify them, we also think about who do we not want to talk to? Is there a particular user type that if you spent an hour getting feedback from this particular person, wouldn't really be an hour well spent? Maybe that's just for this particular aspect of your project, something you're working on right now. So this is an example from a Nest thermostat study. And you're thinking about screening out the users. Who do you not want to have in your study? The one example here is unusually technical users. If we want the Nest thermostat to be convenient to use for people who aren't particularly technical, if all of our research was with people who were engineers and usually highly skilled technical professionals, we might not get the answer to can average users successfully use our product, right? Okay, but we want to define that more succinctly. So here we're thinking about, we want to screen out particular job titles, perhaps engineer or product manager, designer. And we want to ask the user whether or not they fit our criteria in a way that's open and allows them to give us the correct or incorrect answer so that we can pick from a pool of users. In this case, if you're currently working, what's your occupation? On the flip side, how might we want to target users? How do we get people who have the correct behaviors that we want to incorporate into our study? So here again, as an example, perhaps we want iPad users. Perhaps we're creating an iPad interface and we want to make sure that we're testing with people who have experience with iPads. We want to rule out if they're unable to use the product because they've never used an iPad before versus because our particular iPad app is not quite right for them. So, okay, but iPad user is really broad, right? So they may have used one 6 months ago and it's been in their drawer for the past 6 months, they just don't pull it out. So we're specifying people who have used an iPad 3 times in the last week. We don't want to ask this as a yes or no question when we're screening participants. We want to, again, ask a broader question that gives them the opportunity to give us the correct or incorrect answer so that we can decide from those answers who we want to talk to. So the way you might pose that question would then be, in the past week, which of these devices have you used at least 3 times? And you give them a list that includes the device you want, the device you don't want. Sometimes I make up fake devices so that I can sort of have a red herring in there and find out if people are perhaps saying yes to everything because they want to participate in the study. And that does happen, thankfully not often. So then we're going to recruit 5 to 6 users for testing. You're going to think about putting together a screening survey based on the examples we talked about just now. And you can also, I'm sure, look up examples online of screening surveys. And some ways of doing this, you can do this in a Google form, you can do this in something like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics, which are a little bit more featureful if needed. But the reason for that is you want to sort of broadcast a little bit more broadly. You want to go a little bit beyond your normal people. If you have users who are always writing on your forums, for example, they have a particular opinion. You might want to get a slightly broader opinion, a slightly less heard opinion, so that you're sort of casting that wider net. Those screening surveys, if you are in a large company or you have a little bit of budget, will often be distributed either by an internal recruiting team or a third-party recruiting partner, or if you're doing this on your own, you can post this to forums where your type of participants maybe congregate or get information to encourage people that if they're interested in providing feedback, they can sign up. I will remind you, you do want to collect their contact information because you are going to be reaching out to them and scheduling a particular time that you're going to be talking to them. And then you also want to consider, if possible, some sort of appropriate incentive or thank you gift. These people are taking time out of their day to give you feedback, so it's always nice if you can do something for them. often we give an $80 to $120, $150 thank you gift for our participants when I go to do user research. Sometimes the audience is such that it's inappropriate to give a monetary thank you. And so I've seen things like a donation to a charity on behalf of the person, or swag is often a nice thank you gift as well, to get people feeling like they're participating in your organization. Okay, so I've said 5 to 6 people, and a question that sometimes comes up is that enough? Do we have enough people, enough perspective? I will say, for when we're talking about usability testing, I often share this proof from Don Norman at Norman Nielsen Group. It talks about the likelihood of finding errors when you're doing a usability test. So you can see sort of the likelihood of each participant finding errors when it's an easier to identify error on the top solid bar, or more difficult to identify error on the bottom dashed bar. I'll also say that there's an element of practicality to how many people you're going to talk to. You want to get enough information that you feel like you are de-risking your launch, and you're learning and you're getting information that you can use to then iterate on your design. But you want to keep it light enough that you give yourself a chance to continue doing studies as you're building your product. So you're not investing everything in that very first design you're testing. You're giving yourself a chance to test, improve, iterate, test again. I'll also say that the kinds of tests you're doing and the kinds of questions you're asking will impact how many people you're talking to. If I have a study where there's 4 very specific and not overlapping user groups, and we need to know what each one of them thinks and how their workflows look like right now, and they're very different types of people, I'll probably be looking at a larger sample size there. So something to keep in mind as well. Okay, so we figured out what kind of people we wanted. We recruited them to our study. We convinced our stakeholders that we're going to test with 5 people or 6 people, and we're going to iterate and we're going to try it again. We get them in a room. What happens next? So this is an arc of how your interview might go. The first thing you're going to start with is you're going to introduce yourself, introduce the team. I often like to tell people that they will not hurt my feelings. I always point out that I'm the user researcher. I didn't draw the prototypes. I didn't engineer this prototype. You're not going to hurt my feelings. My job is to find out what's happening before we invest the engineering resources to bring this to market. I also, as difficult conversations come up through the interview, will remind people again that I appreciate their honest answer. All feedback is really helpful. If you are having them sign a non-disclosure agreement or an informed consent document, that's something you want to check on as well. Then you'll get their background. How do they relate to your product? How do they currently use your product? How do they use competitor products? What does that relationship look like? Then you'll give them those 3, maybe 5, but probably closer to 3 tasks that you identified as something you want to test early on. Remember when we identified our critical tasks? This is where they come back in. For my studies, that might look like something imagine you've just logged into Crashlytics and you need to check the performance or the stability of your most recent release using this dashboard. Where would you click? Think out loud. Tell me what you're looking for. What specific information are you hoping to find? Things like that. Gets into scripted questions. Is this the information you expected? What are you hoping to find here? Things, so on and so forth. You then leave some time for the participant to ask you questions. And then, of course, you thank them and let them know how they're going to get their incentive or their thank you gift if that's what you're doing. So some example questions that I like to bring into my interviews. I often ask, is this what you expected? How does this compare to your current workflow? I'm not necessarily looking for definitely better, definitely worse. I'm often asking probing questions, follow-up questions to find out like what's different about this from your current workflow? What's easier? What's harder? What are the trade-offs? I love to ask, what information are you missing? Sometimes people don't think to say like, oh, I always check this thing, or I always try to do this with your app, but this new dashboard doesn't allow it. You kind of have to probe for that. And then one other one that I think is interesting, and especially if a participant looks like they're getting frustrated, is if you saw this, what would you do next? Oftentimes that's where I hear things like, if this happened, I'd probably close the app. I'd probably close the dashboard. I'd go to this other dashboard to double check. So if this happened, if what is happening in the prototype right now happened, what would you do next? And a few more tips. I will say, don't defend the product. That's probably my biggest thing that I would say is important, especially if you're not typically doing user interviews as you're coming into a product. My absolute favorite moment, like that moment that Darren described where the users just could not find the button, is when you made a feature, you shipped a feature, you know they have it, and they're asking you for that feature. And you're sitting there going like, but if you just click here, you will see that feature. It is the thing you are asking for. You have it already. That's the thing we shipped 3 months ago. That's not even part of this test. Why aren't you there? That to me says that maybe we shipped the right thing, but it's really hard to find, or it doesn't meet the participant's mental model, the user's mental model about where it should be, how they should access it, where in the process of doing their work they should find it. So as much as possible, answer those questions with more questions. Oh, that would be a really great feature. What would you use it for? Where do you expect to find it? Under which menu would it be? Where on the screen would it be? Where should we put it? Don't defend the product. This is user research is the time to sit back and take in rather than defend or sell. And I know it's really, really hard. I especially know it's really, really hard when I have been on the team that's made the product, to not sort of step in and show the user how they can meet their need with what we already have. It's so much more fruitful when you learn from them. And then, of course, here's where you get to bring in your business lens and your technical feasibility lens. So as you're doing these interviews, you might start seeing common patterns. You might start seeing that a particular task is not being completed. All of the people you're talking to aren't finding this one button. Or maybe they are. Maybe that's the first thing they go to. Great. Maybe something is taking a little bit longer than expected, or people are questioning particular language that you have, descriptive language or menu language or something like that. You might also see if there's any information or any patterns to the information that people describe as missing. Anything that's use cases that maybe you didn't expect, weren't planning for designing for, that might come up, especially if they're coming up again in a bit of a pattern. And then thinking about any missing functionality. Again, anything users are describing as not there, regardless of whether or not it's there, is something we're going to take in and think about how can we improve for them. With that, you're going to update your design, update your app, and give yourself a chance to iterate one more time, 2 more times, however long, until as many times as you need to de-risk and feel confident in your launch. So with that, focus on the user and all else will follow. And a huge thank you to the Firebase team and to Michael Margalis and Ben Ferrari Church, who put together a lot of this slide content as well. And I'll stop there.
All right, thank you so much.
Sure.
I particularly liked the part about how users can sort of identify pain points, but not necessarily solve problems for you, because they don't have the full context. So they can tell you it's wrong, but not necessarily how to fix it.
Yeah, I really think that's something where there is so much value in getting users' opinions on how they might fix it, because I think it does dig up some of that, what is it they're trying to fix? But I do find it really funny every time I've heard, and I hear it less and less now, but when I started my career in user research, there was a little bit of resistance, and you'd hear that, oh, if I asked my user what they wanted, they'd have to ask for a faster horse. And it's like, that's great. You have to make something faster. Amazing.
All right. So we're going to do a bit of a Q&A now. So if you have questions for Elisa, please put them in the chat. I believe Martin is still around, although he's possibly away for a moment, but we'll probably bring him on in a moment. But, oh, he is on. I will add him. Hello. We have all of us here. So if you have questions for either of them, please put them in the chat. I will start. I have a question for Elisa. I was wondering, so when is a good time to start conducting usability testing? Do you need like a full prototype? Do you need just the core functions? Kind of when to think about that?
That's a great question. So it depends on the kind of user research you're doing. I will say for usability testing specifically, getting at least a couple of screens together, something that if it's not clickable, that's fine. I'll often have the user, if it's pen and paper when we're in person, when that was a thing, I would do paper mocks and have people sort of point and circle and draw on. There's some tools you can do that remotely as well. So walking people through static mocks is totally fine. I will say having somewhat realistic content, even if it's not clickable at all, is helpful, because when I've tried it without that more realistic content, I've gotten users get distracted a little bit. You really have to remind them that it's really a work in progress. There are other kinds of user research that I will say don't require any prototype at all. You might be doing needs finding or really early concept testing, things like that, that you can start even earlier.
All right. I will ask a question for Martin then. I was curious about some of the accessibility considerations that you find are most often overlooked. Something that you see is often kind of forgotten about, but is very relevant to include.
Yeah, I mean, the real obvious ones are just our text size and contrast. They're the real obvious ones. A lot of text is tiny. And then using colors as the differentiator. And then another big one is just what you write on the buttons. So many buttons don't do the thing that they say they will do, or there's just a vague kind of a submit or click here. So people really can't. People without especially if you're thinking about people that can't see all of the context or skip down, they're not going to figure it out. Like, and that doesn't just apply to like people with disabilities; it just applies to everyone.
Yeah, I can't handle tiny text. I know with buttons as well, I find there's a lot of things about what to have as a button and what to have as a hyperlink, and how it can get confusing if you sort of mix them up all the time and are not consistent.
Yeah, and the thing designers always hate is they always hate hyperlinks with underlines. But I never don't put underlines on hyperlinks because people don't know that they're hyperlinks otherwise. It might not be the prettiest thing in the entire world, but you'll get used to it. And if you've got some other great way to solve the problem, I'd love to hear it.
Right. There is a question in the chat for Martin, which is, what are your thoughts toward using iconography when addressing a culturally diverse world?
Interesting. Yes, iconography is painful in some ways and very helpful in other ways, because the nice thing about the nice thing about iconography is it gives you something visual to kind of anchor yourself to. It breaks up the wall of text. It can be pretty. It can go with your brand. It can add a little bit of extra helpful context. The trouble is when you use icons only and don't have text with them, because then you can run into the problem of just ambiguous icons that people don't like, that people don't know they don't know what the symbol stands for, and what can be obvious in one context or to one group or to one type of culture can be either confusing, conflicting, sometimes insulting, or downright not nice, rude in certain cultures than they are in other cultures. So if you have them paired with words, at least you can translate the words and you can make yourself clear. But you can run into all types of, especially the more stylish your icons get, you can run into all types of problems. They can look like stuff that you never thought they would look like. And people pick up on that really fast, especially if they're outside your cultural context.
All right. There is a question for Elisa. which is how often would you recommend carrying out user testing during an MVP early beta stage compared to a product you're adding additional features and A/B testing new features?
Yeah, how often is interesting because I've seen this done in a lot of different ways. So I've seen some teams that have a weekly rolling study. So every Wednesday or every Friday, users are coming in, small number of users, and you're putting something in front of them. And it sort of de-risks almost the need for user research because it is such a continuous thing. I've also seen this more as a milestone moment. So maybe in an MVP or an early beta, if you have, you've just launched to beta, so you have some participants who are using this in the wild, as I would say, with their own data sort of in the beta, you might also pair that with a small number of usability studies where you get the same beta product, sort of a demo account sometimes is what we would use, for people to go through and give you very specific usability feedback. So you're getting both that real world use case feedback and that more structured sort of hour of someone's attention, real sort of non-real world, but detailed, deep feedback. And that you would do sort of as you're going to EAP or as you're adding maybe the next feature to EAP. If you're already having an additional or an in the world product that you're just adding a little bit to, that might be something, again, like when that feature is ready to go to EAP or when that feature has maybe a couple of prototypes of a couple of versions of prototypes that it can look like, and you're trying to make that decision.
I was also personally wanted to ask as well. I remember Darren was talking about kind of the difficulty of identifying users and how you can like think that your user is, you know, you have one type of user, but it's actually another. So I was curious about how you go about that process, if you sort of maybe refine it later on as you discover more users or something like that.
Yeah, so oftentimes a team will have a particular type of user that they're going after. This is a product that's targeted towards people who are interested in group sports, or a product for fitness people, or sort of couch to 5K people, or this is a product for large company developers, solo sort of startup developers. So you might start with like, what does your business plan look like? Who do you want to have using your product? Conversely, if you have a product out in the world and you're sort of wondering who is using it, I'd be curious if you do have any data on those people or any usage patterns that you could sort of derive, like, is there a particular country where your users concentrate, or time of day that your users are most active at, any particular features that are most often used, and you could consider maybe that's the time to do one of those intercept surveys instead of diving directly to usability testing to find out more, if you can, about what your users are in your product for, buying your product for, and what kinds of folks they are. But oftentimes that comes top down from what is your business plan? What kind of users are you targeting? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. All right. I will ask one for Martin. I'm curious about, I guess, what you would consider some parts of making a website accessible that are like particularly tricky, or maybe there aren't a lot of good resources, or it's easy to get wrong.
Yeah, the trickiest part is the trickiest part is getting the structure down, because you can do a lot with the other things after, like with an existing site. But it's very difficult to restructure a site. Like if you've gone div all the way down to the ground, you have to break apart that site and, you know, remake the front end essentially. So, but the other side is if you do that, then like you get so much for free once you do it, if you set up the structure in the correct way. So it's great if you're starting from scratch, but it's very hard to do it when you're, you know, if you're doing it after the fact. And I think, yeah, I've done both, and yeah, the latter is really difficult. Like you can make text bigger, you just go in there and make, change CSS properties. Not that hard, but changing the whole structure of the page to make a screen reader be able to read it is a different kind of kettle of fish. But most of them are honestly small changes, and a lot of it is just a kind of a change in the way that you approach a thing, and again, most of the tech is already kind of there, and there are lots of tools, so none of it's too hard. You can get like sticky things like tables. Tables can be sticky, and graphs, especially if it's complex, because you have to then kind of explain a complex graph with words, which is the whole reason you use the graph in the first place. You didn't want to do that. So those are some of the things. I was going to actually ask Alyssa, can I ask a question? Is that okay?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on moderated versus unmoderated? I always ask this.
Ooh, good question. My personal sort of take on unmoderated research. So we're, for anyone watching, if you're doing a survey might count, but oftentimes there's a smaller sample size exercise where you have, say 10 people, 20 people go through and do a card sort on a website or something like usertesting.com. My take for that is it's very, very convenient. You can launch your study at 4 p.m. and go to dinner and come back the next day, and you have 20 people who've given feedback, and it's great. And I think that's a really nice way to bring in a little bit of user testing really rapidly and sort of get into that practice. The downside is that it's hard when you learn something you didn't expect. I think this is true of surveys as well, because there's not a lot of follow-up questions, even though you might have like video snippets of participants talking. Oftentimes it's nice as sort of a research appetizer, but if you learn something unexpected, you're going to have to go back and figure out how to get more detail there. What's your experience with this, Ben?
Oh, a little bit of both, just like you. Yeah, it is. It's wonderfully convenient, especially if you've got a lot of stuff worked out. If you're on the other end, if your prototype is very tight, then it can be really useful. But like you say, I mean, like you said, the group of like having like a small group that you check in like on a weekly basis, that's great just for kind of continuity and kind of people's familiarity with you and with the product, and they get more comfortable with telling you how wrong you are, which is always nice. Because people are always trying to be nice, even if it's unmoderated. They're still trying to be nice to you because they want to be nice to the kind of ghostly stranger who created it. Whereas if you build up kind of a rapport, like I used to do one with salespeople who are very forthright anyway. But like if you build up any type of rapport, like they'll really trash your work, like they really enjoy it, and that's really what you want.
Definitely true.
All right, I have.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, I have a question for Elisa. One of my previous employers used to invite developers for user interviews. Personally, I thought that it was great times, like very insightful to learn more about the product before put my hands on and starting developing it. But on the design perspective, how sorry, I lost the word. How useful or how good it can be having the developers together at this point? And do you have an experience using that approach? What is your thoughts about it?
Yeah, do I understand correctly that they used to invite developers who are working on the product to attend user sessions with external users? Is that right?
Yeah, is it?
Yeah, I think it's really helpful. So I tend to invite my engineering teams to live stream sessions that I'm doing. So as Darren was saying, sort of behind the one-way mirror, we don't really do a one-way mirror where I'm working. We tend to do a lot of remote sessions, so then I can live stream to my engineering teams, to my design teams, to my product teams as well. I think it's helpful because I want the people who are ultimately going to be taking the insights from the user research and implementing them to see the research and sort of have that very direct empathy for our end users. Now, I will say I also work on a very technical product, and I am not a technical person. And so it's also helpful at Firebase for me, because the engineers might hear something or pick up on something that we have a conversation about later that I maybe wouldn't have caught on my own. And so that's very helpful to have that group debrief as well. But at the end of the day, I feel like user research is a team sport. If I was out alone in the universe looking at whatever I personally cared about, it might be something very archaic. So if I'm doing user research, it's really for my teams, and it's for sort of making sure that everyone I'm working with, it has a bridge to the end user who we're trying to serve. How did you find that experience?
Yeah, for me it was very very great. Quite. It took a while to get used. Like at the first ones, we cursed the person who invited us, but
Users
yeah,
are
it
so
was.
bad, aren't they?
yeah. But yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I've definitely had moments. I have a good relationship with this person, and they're not a Googler, so I'll share this story. I had a product manager in a user interview, and we were talking about like pop-ups and what do pop-ups feel like to the user. And the user was just like, no, I don't like them. No, even if they're informative, I don't like them. Even if they're like fun content, I don't want them. And finally, she just couldn't hold it anymore. She said, when you're in the mood for pop-ups, what kind of pop-ups do you like? And I was like, this is the classic downfall of sort of trying to defend the product. And I totally get it. I think it's we get really invested in the things we make, and it's really hard when it's like, maybe not that direction. So I can imagine you cursing the person who invited you, but hopefully it wasn't. Hopefully it was an informative and eventually fun experience.
Yeah, basically, don't tell any bad thing about my baby. Don't touch on the things that I built. Yeah, but yeah, it's a thing to break.
It's hard. It's genuinely hard because it's not, no one comes to work to make bad product. And so everyone's doing their best and trying to make sure that they're creating a product that they're proud of. I think the hard part is that we're not our users. And so sometimes we get surprised by ways in which our users are different than what we thought they were and the changes we have to make.
It's so common for things to kind of seem intuitive when you're used to them, and then they're not actually intuitive. It takes a while to pick them up.
Yeah, I wish that word didn't even exist sometimes. Like someone gave me the example before of like, well, if light switches were intuitive, they'd be on the light. They wouldn't be on the wall somewhere else. Like it's. I wish the word didn't exist.
There's one more question in the chat, which is kind of a similar thing, which is, are there any design features that come to mind developers have commonly mistaken as being easy to understand, but user testing has shown otherwise?
I don't know that there's a particular trend that I have found. I think it really does vary between what my designers and engineering partners are used to building versus what my end users sort of expect from the other tools that they're using and have been trained on. So I don't know that I've ever seen, I'm sure it'll wake me up in the middle of the night and I'll think of a perfect example, but I don't know of a particular example where like this is always a bad idea or this is always a great idea. It's a good question.
It is a good question. One thing springs to mind. It's not exactly that question, but a thing that commonly comes up is customizability of various things. We in tech, we think that's great because we want to customize all our software because we're absolute software legends and we know how to use all the stuff. And users never want to do that. But if you ask them, they'll always say they want to do it. Always, every time it's ever been asked, they say, yep, I want all the options. I want to be able to change the layout and change the colors and, change what shows up in my notifications and all this jazz. And then when you spend ages building all this stuff, they go in and they never use it. You use the default every time because they don't care about your product. They're just trying to get their work done. That's the only one that I've been through the ringer maybe more than once, obviously, is customization.
That's actually a good point. That reminded me of, I've seen this in food and beverage as well, and consumer packaged goods. So that might be there's like some desire for customization, but within guardrails. Like I want to customize, but I don't want to mess it up. Like you tell me the right way to customize so that you, the expert, do it right for me.
Yeah, it's like I was in a sandwich shop before that had no like pre-orderable sandwiches. It was all like you had to like call out all the ingredients, and I was like, oh, I can't do this. I just wanted to go in and say, give me a Milano, or give me a whatever the sandwich is. Give me the sandwich of the day. I don't want to make this decision. But
too much pressure.
Too much pressure.
All right. I don't have any more questions. I don't see any in the chat. What about you, Leo?
Yeah, me neither. Yeah, all good.
This was really great, though. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you everyone for watching as well, and asking questions and just kind of being with us. This was a good time.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
Best of luck.
And I suppose that's a wrap. So yeah, thank you everyone, and come to the next event.
Yeah.